Okay, assalamualaikum and good evening to all. So basically, today we are having a debate between Team A and Team B. So I would like to introduce this side is the government and this side is the opposition. So basically, the motion today is this house regrets the rise of global languages like English.
A global language is a language which is the language where is most widely used in the world. We on the government team realize that the rise of a global language is something which is dangerous and is detrimental. Firstly, we should contemplate on today's motion in that it states that this house regrets the rise of global languages, not that this house would ban global languages. We don't argue that we don't need a global language, but we argue that the world inevitably would be better off without a global language. Now, let us go to the burdens which we must prove, the burdens which we have taken upon ourselves to prove in order to win this debate. The first burden is that a global language is unfair to the languages that are not deemed global languages. Secondly, not having a global language creates for an inclusive society. Okay, on the first point. Having a global language creates for a situation, First, we need to look at the nature of the global language. Global languages such as English is promulgated, is brought in this world mostly, dominantly through colonization. Therefore, it comes to the question, is it ethical that we should use a language which comes from violence, which comes from the discrimination of other people, which comes from the taking of other people's lands, etc. Yes, Kina?
Without the existence of a global language, how else do you suggest all these countries to have a global connection with each other?
Yeah, we'll come to that. That's in our points. Hold on. Okay, now, to my first point. Having a global language creates for a situation which is risky as the collapse of the global language will cause for chaos. In other words, pandemonium is something which is inevitable in the event of the attenuation of the global language. First, we have to understand of the nature of languages. Languages are something which change all the time, which is why you have Oxford Dictionary, edition 6, edition 1, edition 2, etc., etc. Therefore, it is the nature of that language in itself. To have so many people to rely on one thing which is ever-changing and is not rigid, not steady, is something which will create risk. Not only that, but global languages such as English can easily be replaced by other global languages in the near future. We have to look at our contemporary world, which global language has been embedded into, which has created for a society which is rigid in mind and cannot adapt to the introduction of a new language. Therefore, if this situation, which is highly possible and has happened many times, to happen again, will surely create for pandemonium, because the global society will not be able to adapt in time and will surely cause for for civilization as it is to crumble. Yes?
I think it's fair to assume that we're all as different can get. Why is it that we cannot express our differences through a language we can all understand and comprehend?
You are saying that how can we express our differences through a language that we can all understand. So you're saying expressing differences through a common language brought by one people, forced upon another people. You are contradicting yourself in your own POI. You are saying that we can express ourselves by using the language of colonizers who took our land. So clearly that doesn't make sense. Now, back to my point. In the event, some of you might be thinking that this is all theoretical, that a global language will never collapse, a global language will never change. But languages have changed throughout time. Latin is a language which was widely used before this. And yet, does anyone use Latin now? Even if people do use Latin now, it is a Latin which cannot be understood by the people who were speaking Latin in the olden days. Yes?
As much as you say it's a colonizer language, what is the outcome on your side of the house?
Our outcome on our side of the house is that we are providing for the equality of all peoples and all languages. You are forcing a language just because you have the military might to go and take other people's lands on other people. What about the native speaker who cannot speak English? Just because an Englishman claimed that his country is now the rightful land of the Queen of England, you suddenly have to learn English. This is clearly and principally discriminatory. Now, for you to lean such a big part of society, which is language, on something which is ever-changing is surely risky. Therefore, we urge you to come to the side of the house which calls for all languages to be placed on the same plane, which calls for the non-discrimination of any language, which calls for which calls for cutting down risks on leaning society on one dominant language. With that, I rest my case.
Whoa. The world is as torn can get. We are different as it is already, not only by how we look, but also about what we fight for, what we believe in, etc. The world is not a nice place. It is something that we can all agree on. But not having a global language or regretting the rise of global languages would even increase our differences and promote global disconnectivity between nations. And we think that this is a fault that side of government conveniently pay a blind eye to. A couple of rebuttals coming from our side of the house, but before that, let's clarify a couple of things. What exactly is a global language? It is a tool that is used on a global scale for you to be able to connect with one another, not through your hearts, but maybe through discourse and discussions that happen. It is important for us to have a global language to promote uniformity and for us to establish a common ground in which we are able to understand one another and fight about the differences that we have in the first place. It is impossible for me to speak in Malay to someone who has never even heard where Malaysia comes from, and I am trying to explain to them about durian, but they have no idea what that even means because I'm saying buah and they don't understand what fruit is. Yeah. No, thank you, sit down. But the second thing, and most importantly, what is global language not? We say that global language isn't a coercive tool that refrains you from using your respective languages. Let's take a look at status quo. We have countries like Korea, Japan, and even sometimes Malaysia, who are so proud to use their own language, but they have their own translators to translate their speeches for them. Why? Because when I am proud of my language, I am proud of my identity. But when there is a translator, it is so that my pride can extend to those who do not understand my language. That they too can know that I am patriotic as a Malaysian and I am Lee Chong Wei and I'm proud. I won against Lindan. And this is something that's important because we are able to create connectivity and resonation on a global scale. A couple of clarifications, I have two of them. Number one, we concede that a global language rise from a nation that is considered to be powerful. Something that I will also deal with what Ikram has said on how he wants to say it comes from colonization and stuff like that. You have to understand, global languages do not only rise from colonization because, hell, it's 2019. Some of the global languages that we have include Korean and Mandarin because competition between nations exists and we think that global competition is good because now we have a facade of market that people can choose from and that is good. And we have people eager to prove the worth of their nations and that is good because we see people being in a chase trying to promote their own identity and their own country, and this is good because you promote the world to become more connected and to embrace one another in trying to progress in whatever ways that you can. No, thank you. But then again, when they want to talk about last rebuttal that I have for you is on the issue of equality, right? Which is something that's super ununderstandable, I would say. The world as we know it is already inequal. when you regret a global language, you further make the world unequal. Because in the very first place, as an American, I'm already discriminating people from Sri Lanka for the fact of being from Sri Lanka and the skin color that they're in. But now they don't understand what I'm saying. Now they don't understand English. Now I can say that they're savages. Now I can say that they're disconnected from the global world because they don't speak in the language the entire world speaks in. And I think that this is harmful to them even. How are you supposed to promote equality when the root cause of the problem is that we as individuals were unable to accept each other as equal beings in the first place? It's not a matter of language, it's a matter of your heart. And that is something that you need to understand before going forth. So what is the case coming from the side of opposition? We have 3 minutes to prove, firstly, uniformity is necessary. Second, global connection. And Hina will heavily talk to you about how global disconnectivity that will happen on the other side of the house and how it's so harmful and detrimental. So 2 things in my speech. Firstly, there is no need to regret. 3 things that we demand side of government to actually prove. Number 1, the tangible harms that a global language can cause. We think that a global language do not cause a tangible harm that will eventually lead to mass chaos and mass destruction. And we think that the harms they cause are minimal at best. What are these harms? We think that the harms that they tried to talk about but failed is that there are countries who do not have accessibility to know of English. No, thank you, sit down. To know of English, and we disconnect them from the rest of the world. Number 1, we think that in the process of globalization, you have to concede that these countries have to step up their game and learn that language in order to connect with everyone else. Number 2, however, we think that there's already a global effort to promote the spread of knowledge on English for these disconnected countries. And lastly, we are willing to bite the bullet and say it's a global fault then that we disconnect these worlds and refuse to teach them English or refuse to connect them into our part of the house. This is a problem of bigotry and racism, and not because of language. This has been the existence for the longest of time, and I think the use of language actually eased the problem at the end of the day. Before that, sure.
What gives global languages like English the priority over other languages that are not deemed globally recognized?
Well, I think that answer is quite obvious. Number 1, economically speaking. Number 2, achievement speaking. Number 3, the amount of information that you have, The next thing we're going to talk about is the benefits that you get from appreciating a global language. 3 things. Number 1, you create uniformity, which is something that is super important. Why? 2 levels. 1, we're different as different can get. At least now we are able to share things as like countries with one another. B, at least when we talk about our differences, people can understand our differences and they can make conclusions and we can actually build for something better. Discourse eventually happens. B, there will be sharing of a vast pool of knowledge under our side of the house. And this is important because research that each country can actually get will be shared thoroughly among individuals, and this is something that should be celebrated because translations exist, but at the same time, we are able to connect with one another with what we have. And lastly, international discourse, something that is super important. That's not something else. Diplomatic relations, trading, foreign policy, international organizations, all of these things can only happen when you have a global language in which you are able to discuss about more important matters that aren't language, for example, the economy and wars that are ongoing. So under our side of the house, global language is not something to regret, it's something to be grateful for. Thank you.
Yeah. Nice shoes.
Side opposition here has, in my opinion, retracted themselves several few times in this debate. I'm not sure if they quite understand what is at stake in this situation, as on side government, we're trying to argue the fact that global languages themselves prove to handicap society and the globe in global international relationships. Now, I'll start off my debate with a few rebuttals. Now, I asked the first speaker on what makes English such a prominent or deserves the status of being a global language, and if not English, any other global language like Mandarin or Korean, for example. And she answered in the sense that through economical, through knowledge and through achievements. And yes, is that not itself discriminatory? Does that not itself provide problems to these developing nations that have not achieved the same level of success that these developed nations have had for the past several years in front of them? How do you expect developing nations, developing citizens who barely can can barely survive in their own nation to cater to these achievements, to create the same situation and create the same level that they have towards these developed nations. Moving on, the side of opposition wants us to prove on how the tangible harms that a global language can create towards the implementation. And yes, we will prove that. We will prove both the minimal and the both destructive nature that will happen in our points later on. Also, side opposition talked a lot about their benefits, on how you can create uniformity, you can understand international discourse, you can share knowledge, you can create international conversations. But then they go on to say how there's the presence of translators, how there's these people who are claim to be so proud of their language that they want translators to come in and change the language, but then they also fight for global languages to be used as the medium of instruction. The side of opposition, the world that the side of opposition claims to live in is as if that you cannot communicate without a global language. You cannot communicate without one single language. No thank you, please sit down. That it's impossible for you to talk to one another just because you don't speak one single language. Yes?
What's the incentive for me to actually learn multiple other languages if we don't have a global language, given that the world is greedy?
What's your incentive? To communicate. That's the main idea.
Sir.
No thank you. Just because there is a global language, why do you have to conform to the global language? Why do you have to force yourself to learn that language in order to communicate? When you can make the effort, the conscious effort, to take into account people's cultures, people's languages, and their citizens. No thank you. Please sit down, the both of you. Moving on to our actual points. We want to prove to you how that these global languages create a more inclusive society through our first argument that global languages are principally and practically discriminating in nature. We were raised with this common misconception, with this common idea that the only standard of success is you can speak languages like English or Mandarin, where these languages are the ones that will guarantee your future in terms of economically, politically, or socially in standards. Why do we have to conform to these ideas? Who gave these languages the right to be better than everybody else? Just because I, a Malay native, does not know English, I am deemed unknowledgeable, I am deemed uncultured just because I cannot speak a language that is spoken by everybody else in the world. So why do I have to face discrimination? Why does a native speaker of English does not have to go through the struggles that I have to as a non-English speaker to learn a different language just because to guarantee my future and to guarantee my survival? Yes, Ina.
How else do you suggest people to connect with each other from across the world if there is no global languages?
Thank you. How do you expect this? Is through learning of different languages. Through learning of languages that does not have to be a single global language. To learning different languages from all over the world. Why do we have to conform to one language? I keep repeating this, but does our opposition not understand that a global language is not the only way that you can communicate. You can communicate through any language that you want as long as you, the individual, or the country put in the conscious effort to respect these other people's languages and their backgrounds.
So,
yes.
In Malaysia, as a Malay, I don't learn Tamil and Mandarin when we live in the same country. On a global scale, how am I, as a white American, expected to learn Xhosa simply to communicate with them?
In this situation, why do you have to make it such a problem that they have to learn? No, I rephrase my sentence. If you want to communicate, why do you have to put the burden on them to learn the language that you can speak, to learn the language that they can communicate in? Why you are essentially facing the situation that they are facing? So why can't you put yourselves in their shoes and understand that through a global language that only one person can communicate, it in itself reduces the ability for people to communicate in general? No, thank you. Please sit down. Moving on to our second argument, in the sense that the absence of global languages allows people choice. It reaffirms the ability to make decisions on their own. This is in the sense that we live in a world of diverse cultures. We live in a world, as you want to say, that are different on each and every single level. So this allows for the individual to learn what they want, to communicate in however they choose is what they believe in. I asked the opposition this: how relevant are global languages today? If I am from Malaysia and I want to communicate with somebody else from Brazil, why do we need English as a global language? Why do we need Mandarin as a global language? Both of us don't speak those languages. Why can't one of us just learn the other languages to communicate? That is what side government is trying to say. That you do not need to depend on global languages just to communicate, because there are other methods, there are other ways that they are inclusive towards every single people, towards every single country and their races and the languages that they carry. We also believe that we are going to the hard line here. We are preventing a hard fight in the sense that yes, it may be difficult for everybody to learn every single languages, but it's better for us to live in a world where no languages are being deemed more important than another. They are being more relevant than one, where we believe that all languages, regardless of where they are, regardless of the importance, economical achievement, or some social aspect, regardless of where they come from, they do not need to be deemed as one superior language just because of that. We as the government believe that we should empower everyone to learn the language of their choice, to know what they want to do so that they can communicate with one another based on their own reference. If they want to communicate to somebody else from a foreign land, then it's their responsibility, their choice and their own efforts to learn that language. Not the effort of everybody else to learn a single language that it indirectly handicaps and discriminates society as a whole. We on site government here believe that language is a choice. Language is abstract, language is subjective. We can learn what we want and we can communicate, not just through one language, but multiple languages from around the world. It's only our conscious effort and our ability to make that effort so that we can communicate. As we are not just one world, we are multiple cultures from different backgrounds coming together to communicate as one human race.
Notice how side government has been saying about how it is the people's choice to choose what language they want to learn. We tell you that even on the side of opposition, that choice still stands, and in a way, it stands better than how it stands under your side of the case. So let me first start with rebuttal, right? So he stated about how the idea of how people will struggle to learn like languages, to learn like global languages, right? So we tell you that it is even more difficult under their case, where people need to learn like the languages where they think that they only want to learn. For example, I only want to learn Tamil and Malay, and then I want to pursue my dream job, in which requires me to learn Mandarin and English, in which is can consider as the global language. Then that would make it even more difficult for me, right? So moving on, he also stated about how people are forced to one global language. So first of all, Sarah have already stated to you about it's the idea of having global languages because a dominance of those languages, like in the form of achievements and economically speaking and things like that, right? So we tell you that no one is forcing anyone to learn that one language. Why? Because we tell you that these languages, these global languages, are accepted globally, not to say that it is forced on the people just because like it's the only, just because it's the easiest way for them to connect, right? So moving on. He also stated about how global languages have been failing. Why? Because the people still cannot speak English. They still need to have translators in the end of the day. We tell you that this is not a bad thing. Having translators in order to like communicate with each other is actually something very important. And it doesn't mean that global languages have been failing. It just means that it stands how it is important for people to have global languages in order to have like a common ground in order to communicate. Instead, under their world, where they think that they give a choice to us, instead they're making it more difficult for the people. But before that, sure.
To have a translator, and now you're saying that that's common ground. So how is that common ground? What about our side also, which will also need a translator? Then how is it different from your side?
Apa salah translator? So I'm just asking you that translators did nothing wrong in today's case, and to say that just because we have translators, then we don't have any common ground, then it falls worse under your side of the case, where these people don't have translators, where it's not common for translators to be able to translate Riam to English, right? So like how is it even better under your world? And it is a common ground under our case. Why? Because it is common for these translators to be able to translate Riam to English. So it's easy for them to connect. It is a common ground under our side. So moving on, they also stated about how it is like we are not fighting for equality simply because we believe that some languages are like way dominant than the other. We tell you that this is basically very necessary. Uniformity is very necessary. And also, equality is better fought under our side of the case, where if there's any problem and we are like, for example, I am a Muslim and I need to explain my situation that I've done nothing wrong, I'm just wearing a niqab to cover my awrat. How do I explain it to the authorities if they're speaking a different language than I am, and I only choose to learn Arabic, for example? That's even worse than your side of the case, right? Okay, moving on to our side of the case, but before that, sure.
So you're talking about equality and unity, but then you're also giving a circumstance where this person who speaks Arabic is forced to learn the language of her, like the Copts, for example. How does that equate to equality and unity when she is forced to learn that language?
She's forced. how is it, under your side of the case, that girl can stand up for herself when there is no equal platform for them to understand each other? We tell you that even if it comes to a point where she is forced to learn English in order to adapt, it is way better than under your side of the case, where she still thinks that, oh no, I don't have to learn English because it is not a global language. Right, it's better under our side of the case because this girl can still stand for herself. So it is more, we fought for equality better than you guys do. So moving on to our side of the case, right? So to extend the Sarah case, where she spoke about global connection, we tell you that having global languages is the easiest way to have a global connection. So first of all, how do we analyze this, right? Common languages used for formal settings such as like economical trade-off, diplomacy methods, or solving conflicts or whatever, right? We tell you that this process requires people to learn a global language. Understand that it means that we accept these global languages as a platform for us to communicate with each other. We're not saying that we are forced to learn them, but we accept it as a common ground for people to communicate with each other. For example, like even if China and Japan doesn't want to have like their entire population to be able to understand English, they will still need translators in order to do economical trade-off with the Americans or whatever, right? So we tell you that having global languages is basically, it eases global connection. So why is it important in the first place? Having a language that is able to be understood on a global scale is very detrimental, it's very important, and it is really good. Why? Because it connects countries and it connects people with each other. And actually, you cannot find any flaws in this, right? Because like even if like worst case scenario, I am a Malay and I don't want to learn English, but then I am forced to learn English because it is the global language, then it's nothing bad because language is basically just knowledge. And what's wrong with you having extra knowledge? In the end of the day, no thank you, come sit down. So basically, we believe that having a global languages is the only platform for the people to have global connection, and global connection is the only manner for the people to progress with each other. So we tell you that under our side of the case, everyone from all kinds of countries on a global scale can progress, even though it is the idea is far-fetched, but it is only impossible under our side, where we tell you that global languages is not regretted. So also let me explain about how global disconnection will happen if global languages, if there are no such thing as global languages, right? So we literally would have zero other connectors. Even if we have, nothing would be as easy as having global languages, right? I've already asked the first speaker on what do you suggest would connect with people better, and then he only stated about how then you just learn whatever language that you think what you think you want. For example, they say that they're going to give them the choice. But then if we look at it logically, we see that when we do that, you're only like not conforming to like global languages, in which would make it easy for everyone to communicate with each other. So yeah, we basically think that global languages is not bad at all. Thank you.
We stand Akina.
Ladies and gentlemen, global connection, communication, equality. That is only three things that we heard from the side of opposition. Now, the very fact that they never explained to us why global languages like Mandarin and English deserves to be ahead of other languages such as Malay, Japanese or Hungarian is a very detrimental part in today's debate. Now, the fact that I have to learn English or Mandarin is a prerequisite for me to attain a job, to be accepted to a job, is something detrimental and not only a threat to the equality, but also the disenfranchisement of people non-native speaker of English. Okay, here's how I'll do my speech. Firstly, I'll present some rebuttals that are not fitted into my issues. Then I'll move on to my issues and clashes within this debate. So basically, I have two issues, principal issues and also comparative analysis between the harms and benefits of both sides. Okay, firstly, let's talk about...
Sir?
I'll just take that, no thank you. So firstly, let's talk about equality. Now, we tell you why equality from Kina's speech was wrong from the very first place. Because why? We tell you that common ground equality is not being obtained through language, but through understanding of other people's culture. So we tell you that even if you got medium communications like Mandarin or English, we tell you that equality or common ground might not happen. Because if you take a look at status quo, we do have English existing in society, but why do I see Arabs being discriminated by white people? Why do I see white people themselves being discriminated and disenfranchised by the by the white people? So we tell you that at the end of the day, you do not attain equality through language, but rather you attain equality through understanding and empathy of certain groups of people who are being disenfranchised, and that is what we want to protect in today's debate. And secondly, no thank you. So we tell you what we offer under side government. So on our side, we tell you that why we promote better understanding is that we, instead of promoting a global language, we prefer to promote our own language, our own origin. We tell you that why it's better for us equality to understand that person better rather than you trying to understand a Korean culture through English. No, thank you. So we tell you how we don't see any global connection under the side of opposition. Because why? They're trying to promote a global language through having translators who are speaking on their behalf. No, thank you. So we don't see how that creates a better understanding on their side, but rather on our side, we tell you I would rather bite the bullet, and let's say all of us have done different nationalities. I would rather bite the bullet and learn all these national languages rather than me learning English, because English is perceived as a smart or global language. I'll reject all of you. Okay, so we tell you at the end of the day, under outside of the house, let me remind you again that we're not saying that you don't have to learn English or Mandarin, but we tell you we do not want to inculcate society by saying that you have to learn this language because it is perceived as a good language. Because when you learn it, you are perceived as someone who is ahead of other people who do not learn it. I'll take you later, Sarah. Okay, so we tell you that how all the common ground, equality and connection problem has been dismissed under the side of the house. So we tell you that at the end of the day, when even if Kina said, okay, you're not forced to learn global language, but we tell you that the unfortunate reality in status quo is that people tend to choose this global language over languages like Malay, Indonesian, Japanese, or even Malay, Sarawak Malay. So because why? We tell you that these global languages are still more popular and they create more traction. As what Sarah said in her speech, I'll take you later, is more economically beneficial, and yeah, you can expand your language. So at the end of the day, we tell you that how under their side of the house, they're more promoting disenfranchisement and unfair towards these smaller groups of people who speak infamous languages such as African or yeah, something like that. I'll take you later, Sarah. Okay. So moving on to my first issue in this debate is about principle. So how is it principally justified and relevant to have a global language from the very get-go? Okay before I move on to my issues, defend yourself.
You want to promote your culture and your own language to people of international community. How are you planning to do that when you don't have a global language?
I would rather them learning my language or me learning their language rather than sticking to a global language. Okay, move on. Okay, let's move on to my issue. Okay, principle. So we tell you that the whole speech by Iki was dismissed by side opposition. Because why? We tell you that when she talked about how the nature of this global language being spread by violence, how people have caused bloodshed because they want to promote self-interest, which is their own language. We tell you that's unfair to people who are not native English speakers, because you put people at a point of disadvantage. Because we tell you, no, thank you, like people like us, Malaysians, Indonesians, have to focus on learning this perceived global language, whereas people, babies who are from English countries like England or United States do not have to go through this burden of learning a perceived global language. No, thank you. So we tell you that the whole idea of equality under their side has been dismissed. On opposition, we tell you create no, thank you. We tell you at the end of the day, on our side of the house, even if it is harder to communicate, but in the worst case scenario, even in the worst case scenario, it's hard for us to achieve communication, but we tell you will be more principally justified on our side of the house. And then last issue is about harm that benefits comparatively. So we tell you that at the end of the day, under outside of the house, we tell you we better promote other languages, which leads to a more uniform a society. Because why? Which leads to a burden of development today, which is create an inclusive society. Because at the other side of the house, even if they wanted to promote other languages which are not global, we tell you that they will still lose to this global language. I would still be indoctrinated by my parents to learn English or Mandarin because now I can get easier jobs. But on the outside of the house, we do not have those indoctrination at all. We are not forced or we are not inculcated to learn all this stuff. We are free to choose what language we want to learn, and there is no standard or double standard imposed in all these languages. So in all those reasons, I'm never been prouder to oppose.
I think it's very laughable for government to come up here and say, hey, I want to promote my culture, I want to promote my language, but you have to learn it yourself. And I think that in itself creates a very laughable context in which world do people want to learn your culture when they don't even, when you put your ego, when you harp your ego onto your face to begin with. And we tell you that global language is something that you have to acknowledge that it's a tool for connectivity. It's not something that you harp on and say it's a sign of oppression. And I think within side of government, they're more likely the contingency on them, understanding that global language is a sign of oppression, is something that is very dubious to begin with, because they've been talking to you about, equality. They're going to create equality. They're going to with global language, you're going to diminish culture. But we tell you that you learning a language doesn't mean you understanding a culture to begin with. I think that is one thing that we have to get straight in this debate, because the fact in which where they want you to understand their culture is through learning languages. But we tell you that just because I learn Mandarin doesn't make my eyes more narrow, doesn't make my nose more sharper, right? And it doesn't make my skin lighter. And we tell you that is something we have to acknowledge within today's debate. Because the fact in which where they expect us to learn other languages and make it more non-aligned at the end of the day is something that is very detrimental to begin with. Sit down. I just started, right? So, few clashes and few minor rebuttals before going on to responses to begin with. Firstly, I think one thing that is very unclear throughout the whole debate from side of opposition and from side of government is the fact in which when they want you to learn more languages, to begin with. Firstly, we ask you, is it very feasible, is it possible for an individual to learn multiple languages just because they want to visit a certain country? Secondly, we tell you, is it possible for you to communicate within a lot of languages within summits like G7 summit and economical summit to begin with? And we tell you that it's not feasible. We tell you that at the end of the day, you're going to create a more ununiform society because you have more than 500 languages to begin with. You have a society in which you want to speak your own language and you don't want to resonate with one another because you have that ego of not wanting to understand each other's language, and you have the ego of wanting to stick on to your own language, and that's the harm on the side of government, right? So sit down. So firstly, I think the thing that tears up us the most is not. I think the thing that creates the most segregation within society. It's not about language, right? It's about the skin color that we have, and it's about the oppression that we face. And we tell you that we are able to connect individuals that are oppressed within language, because we tell you that within the spaces of Uganda to begin with, the people, LGBT individuals within Uganda are oppressed, and they don't have a support structure that is local. So they have to learn English for them to be able to reach international grounds, for them to be able to gain international traction, for them to be able to gain international support structure. And we know that this is one of the best ways for you to be able to fight oppression to begin with, not just because you are more egocentric over your language. You have to let other people learn your language and let them and hope for the best that they will understand your oppression. Because the point I'm trying to make here is, without a global language, you are not able to resonate yourself within other people. And we tell you that resonation happens only when you have a common ground within everyone in this status quo. Is that correct? Yes.
That man is speaking Arabic and he says the word Allah Akbar. I'm afraid. Isn't that oppression?
I think the oppression here isn't about language in itself. It comes from the prejudice of individuals. And we tell you that's not a problem about language, it's a problem about the mindset of individuals, the cognitive thinking of that particular individual. And we tell you that language has no part within this debate. I think the part in which where people are scared of Allah Akbar, people are scared of ISIS, is the part in which where they don't understand Arabic. And we tell you that comes from the individual itself, not from the lack of knowledge, because not because of global language to begin with. Sit down. And we tell you that they've been trying to harp on the fact in which where if you have global language, one language is put onto another. And we tell you who the hell cares, right? Because within status quo, you need a common ground. And regardless, even if they were put onto a higher scale, we tell you that the sanctity and the sanctity of a particular what's it called? Bahasa, that particular bahasa isn't going to be taken away. Just because English is a global language doesn't mean I am Malay and I should be triggered because Malay isn't prioritized. We tell you that it is prioritized within Malaysian grounds, and we tell you that that is okay because I still have this the sanctity is still there regardless, right? It's just the fact in which where we have a common ground to speak with other people. And we told that there's nothing wrong to begin with because the world we live in is realistic. It's not a world where every fairy we have our own language. We have to have every language has to be on the same equal ground. We know that that world doesn't exist, and that world is a utopia as a whole. But before that, before my clashes, any of you guys?
So don't you think it's unfair for Malaysian kids now to have the burden to learn English in comparison to English kids do not have to learn Malay? Because English is a set global language.
I don't think that's a problem with status quo because knowingly they have the economic advantage over us, right? We tell you that. Yeah, we have to be real. Malaysia is at a very stagnant rate right now. We are very stagnant as of now, and we tell you that making individuals learn more languages was the problem to begin with because we tell you that at the end of the day it's a form of uniformity. We're not making it more unaligned to begin with because when you make people learn more languages and then you expect people to speak 500 languages in one summit, then it's going to get unaligned because we tell you that these individuals speak English for a reason and these individuals are taught English for a reason. Sit down. So few clashes, but it's not really clashes, it's just sort of a right? So firstly, on the side of opposition, we wanted resonation and connection. We wanted a global connection, but on the side of government, they talked about like they wanted to like global language diminishes culture, which firstly I don't see the link onto how it diminishes culture. Secondly, I don't see even if it diminishes culture, right? Even if they were able to, even if it does diminish culture and you have to create a world where you have to speak your own language, the uniformity wouldn't exist regardless because you cannot have everyone learning 500 languages and it's not possible to begin with. Hence, as a conclusion, side of opposition, we've told you a lot of things, right? We've told you the missing linkages. We've also told you the argumentative on the side. We've also told you we've also pointed out the flaws on the side of government, and we also tell you that global languages is an important tool for us to resonate with one another. Hence, go with side of opposition.
Yeah.